Good morning, North America. Welcome to Church Talk, lively conversation for all things church transformation. I'm your co-host, Dr. Bill Tenney Britton, in our studio in Columbia, Missouri, the heartland of the U.S. And I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, author and denominational leader, Dr. Kris Tenney Britton, the area minister of the Northeast area of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ of Mid-America. Try and say that 3 times fast. Good morning, Kris.
Well, good morning, and welcome to Church Talk Live.
Bill and Kris Tenney Britton here today to talk about time management for the pastors of smaller churches. Now, I think we need to define that, although probably not too much. The average church in America is considered a small church, and that average is running somewhere between 50 and 60 now. But we're talking about churches that are less than approximately 125, really less than 200 in worship attendance, and really looking at the other end of the 100-ish, a little below, a little above, a lot below, a little above, and talking about how pastors need to spend their time if they're going to grow their church.
How you spend your time really depends on the vision of your congregation. You know, some churches are very much chaplaincy ministries, right? So what you're doing basically is chaplaining. Yes, that congregation. Chaplaincy. You're doing chaplaincy with that congregation. You know, in a lot of cases, it's hospice care because if congregations continue to decline, they continue to remain small. If you're in communities that are not growing, then what you're going to see is this slow death, really. And so you provide hospice care. And let me just say that if that's the kind of ministry you're finding yourself in, remember part of hospice care is helping people make end-of-life decisions and also what will happen with their estate, their personal effects. So it's not that you don't have any additional ministry to do than just preaching and caring for folks. But it may be that you are chaplaining there, or maybe you're in a catalytic congregation and they found themselves smaller, but you find yourself with some folks that really want to do something and you want to grow. And that's going to take, again, a different type of leadership.
Right, indeed. And if you're a chaplaincy kind of pastor, and there's a lot of them out there.
A lot of us, yeah.
Well, a lot, yeah. And seminary turns out a high number of those because that's the model that they basically use for training pastors for pastoral care and whatnot. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just calling it what it is, naming it for the reality. And if you're that kind of a pastor, then you need to be in that kind of a church. And when they match up, you know, ministries go for a long, long time, and the pastor becomes beloved, and the congregation loves them, and the pastor loves the congregation. They take good care of each other. It's fabulous, and they do good ministry.
Sure.
But the churches generally don't grow much. And again, you know, if that's the case where you are, this episode is probably not really for you, unless you find yourself in a congregation that is wanting to grow for some reason. For instance, they find themselves desperate because they've, continue to get smaller and smaller and smaller, and they realize they can see the writing on the wall. They're running out of funds to keep them going, and so on. And they are willing to make significant changes in the way they do things to become healthy and effective. Now,
sustainable. Let's put that in there too.
Just because a church gets desperate doesn't mean that they're going to grow or that they even want to grow or do what it takes to grow. What some churches want is more people just like them so that the church can continue. The problem with that whole mindset, or even it's almost a fantasy, is that these churches or these folks, they're hoping for people that aren't out there. Anyone who really wants to be in church of that mindset is already in church.
Well, let me say that I talked to a church leader recently, within the last week or so, and they were talking about how people are coming, but they're not coming back. And we were talking about some of the stuff that's going in, and they're desperate, beyond desperate. They're in such survival mode. And they said, people come in, it's as though they can smell it. And I said, yeah, they're watching you. You're kind of like vultures, circling and circling and circling and circling, and they can smell the carrion that you're carrying with you. So, yeah, there's a difference between being desperate and being open to doing, as open as you can possibly be humanly, right? Open to doing what you're going to need to do. And there's the difference between that and being desperate for survival's sake, and not really, when the push comes to shove, being really willing to do whatever it takes.
Right.
Now,
there's another group who are in smaller churches that are looking for this kind of training or this kind of work, and that is those churches that are actually healthy. Right. Small churches that are healthy and understand that it's about those beyond their building, that what's beyond, and those who are beyond are more important, if you will, than they are, and they want to do whatever it takes to take the gospel to the folks, and so they're looking to grow. Now, one of the things that you said earlier, and I know you didn't really mean to say it, but or infer it, you probably meant to say it, but you didn't mean to infer it, is that if a community is in decline, the churches will be in decline.
No, right, I agree with that, totally.
And that just because your community is declined does not mean your church needs to be. In fact, we know of churches that are literally in the middle of cornfields that used to be in the midst of smaller towns or villages, and those towns and villages have lost their schools, they've lost their zip code. I mean, there's nothing there now. And yet the churches are thriving. They're growing and growing.
Well, yeah, I want to say with that every setting, we can give you examples, multiple examples of churches that are growing and are very effective, are very sustainable. It appears, at least in this part of their life, in all kinds of settings, whether they be rural or town or city, inner city.
Urban, ex-urban, you name it. Yeah, they're out there.
That's not an excuse. We're going to take that off. Well, can we move on? Are we ready to move on?
We're ready to move on. So let's talk about what the small church pastor is responsible for ultimately. And I just want to start off by saying that in other episodes, we've talked about the 4 core processes, and that the pastor of every size church, including the pastor of even, if you will, a house church, all the way up to a pastor of mega church, they're responsible to take care of the 4 core processes one way or the other.
Right, okay. They're responsible to make sure the 4 core processes are taken care of.
Right, exactly.
Right, because some of us here, they're responsible for taking care of them, and in another
making sure they're
episode.
taken care of.
Yes,
there we
exactly.
are. All right. So here's the 4 core processes that every pastor is responsible for. First, bringing people in. That's one of the processes, inviting, bringing people into the church. Number 2 is retaining them long enough so that they can build significant relationships and so that they can be discipled. The third part is, of course, the discipling part. And discipleship is more than someone who reads their scripture and does good prayer. When we talk about discipleship, we're talking about leadership development in the faith. So it's beyond just good head knowledge and even good practices. It's about leadership, on one aspect or another.
And Christian leadership development, because really there are a lot of people that will say, oh, what a wonderful leader that person is. They lead this and they lead that. But there are a lot of great leaders out there that are not Christian leaders. And
leading in a Christian manner.
Right. It goes beyond being a professed Christian, but it does. It is about leading in a discipled manner.
Right. Okay. And then the final one is sending people out. Once you get them in, you get them retained. The ultimate goal, of course, is to get them doing ministry, perhaps within the church, but definitely outside the church, reaching out to do mission with people who are out there. Okay, so those are the 4 core processes. Now, a small church pastor finds themselves so often having to juggle these 4 core processes and with a minimum of people to help them. So we want to say up front that, yes, Pastor, you are responsible for all 4 core processes and to make sure they get done, but they don't have to be getting done in a balanced proportion. And in fact, the number one task that you're going to be, or number one process that you're responsible for more than any other, the one you're going to give the lion's share of your time, as you're going to hear in a little bit, is to the inviting piece, into the getting people in process. You're going to be your top priority?
You know, when I think about smaller churches, and I know not all, because I know of not many, but a few smaller congregations that have no committees. But there are the majority of smaller congregations have committees or departments or whatever they call them. And when I hear these four core processes, you know, evangelism, if there is an evangelism committee, is supposed to be about inviting. I want to set that one aside. But, you know, Christian education, almost every church has something like a Christian education, and it's a matter of tweaking that one for discipleship. Almost every congregation has a mission or an outreach committee, and it's a matter of tweaking that for that sending out. Almost every committee or every church has a membership committee or a fellowship committee, and it's a matter of tweaking that to be aware of the guests and building those relationships.
To retain them.
Right, because let me say this, that in this study, you know, that Gay Reese and I did a number of years ago, we found that the number one reason people came back after their first visit was because of the pastor. That, you know, may have been the pastor invited them, or the pastor spoke with them, or somehow they felt a connection to the pastor. And quite honestly, in most of these smaller churches, it's the pastor who tracks. Sometimes it's the pastor who's the only person who speaks with or has significant conversation with a guest.
Right.
So that's the number one reason. But the reason that they continue to come back and eventually join the church is because they feel as though they have been accepted and welcomed by the congregation. It goes beyond the pastor. So pastor, while you're responsible for all these key core processes, while you are responsible for making sure they're in place and helping people to learn them, and maybe even initially you're going to have to model them because they're not happening, but as you've got to bring others in, show them how you're doing it, and then and get people to do it, because you can bring all the folks in the world, but if they're not ultimately feeling welcome or accepted by the congregation, it's all for naught.
Indeed. All right. And that
my little soapbox.
Right.
Let me get off.
And that covers some of what we're going to be talking about in the bullet points here. But let's get there first. The other thing that's going to be critical is casting long-range vision for the church. Very often churches don't have a long-range vision. In fact, all they can see is to the end of their lifetime, and some of them can't see that far.
Yeah.
And so as pastor, you know, you have to help them see a tomorrow that is not in the by and by, but the tomorrow that this church can be vital, they can go someplace that there is not only hope, but there's a reason to hope and a place to go.
Well, you're saying this, so what I think of is when people talk about long-range vision, it's what you're going to do for Vacation Bible School next year, right? So it's what you're doing for the Christmas and the Lent and the Easter, and you think that you're doing really well if you can look out there. But it really is about what could your church look like in 10 or 20 years. And one of the best exercises I think we know for that is to write a newspaper report for your church.
An article,
10 years,
right.
An article, yeah. And what would you like the paper to be reporting about your church in 10 years?
Right. Fabulous exercise.
Yeah.
All right. The second piece that you're responsible for is preaching transformation and growth, and you know, teaching people how to do it. Life coaching, not just saying you need to. None of this, you got to do this, but teaching them how. We haven't done a good job of teaching them how, including teaching people how to invite. Teach your congregation how to invite, not just say, "Hey, Mabel, can you come to church next week?" How do you reach out beyond the 4 or 5 or 10 people that they know in town, or even the 15 people or 25 people? How do they get to know beyond them and invite others to come to their congregation? And so a lot of work on it, how to build excitement and successes and so on. But you're going to be preaching this and preaching them, giving them the tools for how to. Mm-hmm. All right.
Well, this is one of the bullet points to which I've referred, and that is handing off ministry to unpaid leaders. So, you know, I really want to stress those 4 core processes, though. And we get so out there and so divided and so many things that are going on. It's the 4 core processes. And so start with that. And how are you training and letting those go to other people?
Right. And you need to let go of ministry because as you're going to hear in a moment, about the time management that's coming right up, and how you spend your time. You're not going to have time for a lot of these other parts of the core processes. Now, one of the big mistakes that small church pastors often do, is they get caught up in trying to develop leaders and spending time, well, I need to have this leader in place before. No. You raise them up as you go, and you build them up as you go, and you hand off as you can, but don't make a whole lot of plans on, oh, well, so-and-so is going to do this, and so-and-so's. Begin working and seeing how it goes. But you're going to have to hand off all these ministries to unpaid folks.
Yeah, but we got to be careful. We have to be very careful that we're not developing all these ministries. Be very grounded, be very careful, because a lot of us are overachievers, or, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. I hear, oh, we just got to try something. But you've got all this stuff going off and not anyone to hand it off to.
And so the pastor ends up doing it
Doing
again.
it all, burning out, and you burn out your folks, and you end up leaving, and there's nothing there.
Right. And the ministries we're talking about here of handing off are directly related to the core processes.
Right.
We're not talking about handing off more and more programs.
Right. No
Although
programs.
we are also talking about handing off who runs the bulletin. Handing off, some of those administration tasks that Pastor, you may be doing. It's time for you. In a moment, we'll talk about you need to stop doing that. Okay. The other thing is that you hand off these ministries, but you also have to hold these unpaid leaders accountable.
Right.
Now, accountable doesn't mean you need to do or you didn't do. That's not accountability that like we're talking about within reason, but we are talking about, these are the expectations that we have, or that I have, for this to get done. And this is when I need it done. You need to be very clear. Don't just say, well, I need a bulletin. You need to say, here's the bulletin outline that we use every week. Here's the file if you're using a computer for it, and you probably are. And, this is the file, and all I need you to do is fill this in, but I need this filled in by Thursday. I'll make sure you have the information by Wednesday, and then I need you to run it on Friday. And then you need to hold them accountable for doing that. And if it doesn't get done, to be honest, folks, saving them and doing it yourself is a huge mistake. You don't have to save or stop things from failing. If you don't have a bulletin on Sunday, it's not the end of the world. You may think it's going to be. It won't be. And you can say simply, it didn't get done, but we know what goes in these places, and move on. And I tell you what, the week after, if you haven't stepped up and saved them, someone will, or they'll be on you to help you figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, with that then.
Right.
Under accountability is you've got to get used to hiring and firing people, and
including unpaid staff.
Including unpaid staff. Now, your handout this week says hiring and firing. I would prefer to say
on our
your
book on
says
effective staffing
okay,
says
hiring and firing. I like the idea of transitioning people off our staffs or transitioning people into the right places. And the truth is...
And that's what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And the truth is, they know when they're screwing up most of the time. And if they don't, then they probably have some psychosis going on, and you need them moved anyways.
Or you didn't give them clear expectations.
Yes. So, okay, that's a whole other topic. We won't go there, why they may be not doing it. But you do have a responsibility to help get people into the right places. And so some of the people are going to be in the wrong places, and that's going to mean transitioning them to somewhere else.
That's right.
All right.
All right. So those are the keys, responsibilities you have to deal with. Of course, there's preaching and pastoral care and all that, and we'll talk about in a moment, because now it's time to talk about time priorities.
Yes, ma'am.
And we're over halfway through, and it's like now we're going to talk about time priorities. So here we are. Here is the big, if you will, the big shoe that's going to be dropping, is that 70 to 80% of your time, pastor, needs to be spent doing these 3 tasks. Now you need to hear us clearly. 70 to 80% of your time on these 3 core tasks, and you need to understand that you can't start this next week. It's going to take some time.
Right.
So this is where you're heading.
Right.
It's not where you're starting.
So one of the pieces to do right now is to ask yourself, how many hours a week do I work? or how many hours a week do I want to work?
Or how many hours a week am I paid to work,
and
which is a better question.
Yes, okay. And then, that is a good question. And then what is 70 to 80% of that, right? And then from there, ask yourself how much time you currently spend in these different roles and how you finish out the rest of your time, because my guess is some of us might even say, oh, I don't spend any time doing that. So, where you do that and then start to build a plan. This is that long-range visioning for yourself now and your congregation, of course, vicariously. So the first thing,
all right,
the first point is integrating your first time guests and your returning guests into the congregation.
That's huge. That's huge. And, often what happens is, as you point out, that people come the first time and they don't return. Well, if they don't return the second time, the chances are that the church isn't for them. They were church shopping and it's like, nope, that's not for me. Now, there's lots of reasons why that may be, and we recommend you taking a look at our hospitality DVD set to look and see if your hospitality is where it needs to be. And you get that at the flipyourchurch.com site. But if they don't come back the second time, there's something else going on probably. But if they return a second time, then that means that they are interested in your congregation, and the next big task, Pastor, is for you to help integrate them into the congregation. Some people use the word assimilate. We've come to not really like that term.
I'm assimilating you.
Right. Yeah, the whole Borg thing and whatnot. But the key here is, how do you get them, if you will, adopted by the congregation? Because in a small church, that's what it takes, is adoption. The church has to throw their arms around these people, not just in a superficial hug, but to bring them in as if they were long-lost stepchildren or long-lost cousins or whatever, and help integrate them in the church. Not overwhelming them, but getting them to be a part of, enjoying the small groups or the Sunday school or the fellowship suppers or the outreaches, whatever you're offering, that these people can start making friends and connecting. Because you probably already have some guests coming now and again. So this is your first task, is to figure out how to spend your time integrating guests. The number 2 thing is networking with those in your community who are not in church, specifically, and really very specifically, with those that your church is targeting. And I know we want everyone to come, but you can't reach everyone. If you have no nursery, if you don't have a children's program, reaching young families is going to be very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's not. It's very difficult.
If you're not handicap accessible, there are people you won't be able to reach. If your floors are made out of wood and every time you walk on them or somebody drops a pencil and it goes, or maybe a little bit deeper than that, across the floor, more than likely you will not be able to keep ADHD folk or those with other diagnoses along the spectrums.
So you're going to be spending time networking with your target. Now, if it is young families, where do young families hang out? Where can you meet them? How can you spend time with them? How can you leverage introductions and so on? So that's the number 2 thing you spend time in.
Okay, and number three is attending parties and other functions with your members so that you can meet their unchurched friends. You've got to build your relationship and your sphere of influence, and so what better way to do that with the sphere of influence that your members have. So often members don't want to do the inviting, and by being there they can watch you build relationships. They can watch you let me go back that for a second. It's building relationships. They may have friends, but they don't know how to build relationships outside of those friendship circles. And sometimes people, when they've grown up in a community all their lives, they have their friendships and they don't need any more. And those of us that move around and are itinerant, if you will, in ministry, we come into a community and we have to survive. We have to know how to build relationships. And so we don't think that's a skill that needs to be learned, and what better way to learn it than by modeling it there at these functions and parties.
Indeed. Now, here's going back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show about preaching how to invite. You will probably need to teach your people how to have parties with people beyond their little groups. how to have host events, and et cetera. But if you have someone who's that does 4-H stuff, you want to get them to invite you to some 4-H meetings where the parents are, so you can meet. Scouting and their clubs.
Parties, I can't tell you how many birthday parties for kids I've been to.
And I was invited at one point in a farming community to come help brand calves, and all the neighbors were coming to help brand the calves, and I got to come, but I got to hobnob with those in the community and begin building relationships with those who were there. So attending parties and fellowships with your members, and I want to say what's really great about that is you kill 2 birds with 1 stone, because you're also spending time with your members, and there's going to be pushback as it is, because as you've seen, with 70 to 80% of your time spent on those 3 things, that means the majority of your time is spent with people outside your church. And there's going to be some pushback on that. And so the last few minutes of this program, we want to talk about how to make those changes, how to shift your time priorities so that you can actually spend literally 70 to 80% of your time, or, if you will, 30 to 33 hours of a 40-hour week networking and integrating people who are not in the church. And so here's how to do that.
Well,
the first is
that you've got to take baby steps. You've already said it. You've got to go very, very slowly. And with that, you've got to be intentional.
Right.
I mean, you've got to be intentional about taking the baby steps. And some of us work better by writing things down. We may need to make a reminder to ourselves. There are times when I have made appointments to go sit where there may be people that I can meet, because my shyness really gets in the way. And I'm one of those seminary trained pastors that is very good at sitting in my office. So you've got to be, there's that intentionality.
And that intentionality, as you point out about getting out of the office, and that's the next piece, is you have to get out of the office. But you have to be intentional about getting out of the office. I don't know how many pastors who I've worked with who, even a year later, I've said, you need to be out of the office, you need to be working. And even a year later, they're trying to figure out how to do that. Hey, you need to be intentional. You need to get out of the office. And the way to do that is to look at your calendar and say, I'm going to go somewhere out of the office for 4 hours on this day. And you just start, and you make a habit of it. Tuesdays from 9 until 1, I'm going to go down to the grain elevator, or I'm going to go down to the McDonald's, or I'm going to go, wherever it is in your community where people hang out, you're going to go spend time out there in the public forum. So you need to be intentional about that. So baby steps, be intentional. Get out of the office, because no one comes to your office, or very rarely says, hey, I was interested in finding out about your church, and so on, especially with unchurched people. So out of your office, again, that's 70 to 80% of your time eventually.
So then you want to enlist, if you will, your leaders
get
and
support
right, from your leaders and your informal leaders.
Maybe especially your informal leaders.
The matriarch and patriarch of your congregation,
right,
particularly in those smaller congregations.
Help them to understand what you're doing.
It's a teaching piece, but you better start doing it.
Right.
Get if you're worried about this, okay, because I can hear some of y'all that you're worried about what people are going to be saying. Well, they're worried about what people are going to say. And so I hear what you're saying. Yeah, you better be, because you're going to, but don't let that stop you. It's better to get, or it's easier, really, and I think better sometimes, to get forgiveness than it is for permission. So you get out and you start doing it. You're out there. If somebody catches you, oh my gosh, as though they probably will, but if they do, then you just say, hey, I was out sitting with so-and-so, or trying to meet so-and-so, something along those lines. But then as you get some stories to tell, and as you're talking about this, you're doing a little bit of teaching as you go along, and people, you begin to get them on board, and to begin to teach them, so that they'll start spending more time in discipling and meeting others as well.
And one way to help, if you will, build some bridges, is to tell people where you're going to be. Listen, on Tuesday mornings, if you want to come and drop in and have coffee with me, have a conversation, I'll be at McDonald's between, and here's my cell phone number. If you need to get a second cell phone because you need the separation, then do so. But, tell people where you're going to be so they can come and see you. It really works real well. Okay. All right. The next thing is you got to stop doing some things. You got to stop doing the bulletin.
Yes.
You've got to stop doing probably the website. You've got to stop doing a lot of the reports, or at least the lengthy reports that you've been doing. You got to stop doing so much research and so on.
Cleaning up the sanctuary and the
exactly.
bathrooms.
Right. You got to stop doing some of that stuff. hand it off, or just decide I'm not doing it anymore.
Right.
Don't stop, though,
Right.
your pastoral care.
Right.
Now, this is rich coming from me because I'm not the big pastoral care guy, but I can tell you if you cease doing pastoral care, they will unemploy you really quick.
Yeah.
So what you want to do is continue your pastoral care, but you want to start backing it off. You want it a little bit at a time, and you also want to move from ongoing care to crisis care, so that when someone goes in the hospital, you go see them in the hospital, but then someone else takes up after you've gone and made the initial visit. You
Right.
don't have to see them every day.
Basically, you're a first responder.
Right, exactly.
And you may go and you may do a follow-up visit, and if there are those pastoral needs, something that's really deep in there, but you do need to train up people that are going to do hospital shut-in visits.
Right.
Although I do again want to say how wonderful it can be and fun it can be doing those shut-in visits. You learn a lot about your church that way.
All right.
Okay.
You need to step away from your computer.
Please.
There's so... We often say and teach, and church planters especially, if you want to grow your church, leave your laptop at home. Stop messing with the computer. Stop doing your website. Stop doing social media. The website needs to be there. Make it static.
Mm-hmm.
Tell it on the front page what time services are and your address, and call it good. Don't get too carried away. Knock off social networking unless you live in an area that is total social network, and even then, try and hand it off. Step away from your computer so you can be with people.
Well, and use your social networking not to tell everybody about your life and where you are, or to be the tool you use for letting everybody think that you're busy. It really is a way of communicating about the church, and if you can somehow figure out how to link that with a blog, even though your site is static. But I've seen some of our pastors say things like, "I am so excited about my sermon or this Sunday," or "Wahoo! I read this scripture today, and it really has me thinking about." And
Right.
so, use it for the good of your church. That's what social media is for these days professionally.
Link your website, if you will,
Yes.
to your Facebook or your Twitter feed, so that you can keep that up there and it updates, so you're doing two birds with the same stone. All right.
I want to say something about stepping away from the computer,
Right.
because a lot of people say, well, I can't get away from my computer because I have to preach, right? But here's the deal. No more than 4 hours on your sermon. And we get it. We know. We were taught the same principle a lot of you have been taught, that you spend 1 minute, or I'm sorry, I keep doing that, one hour on your sermon for every minute. So if you preach a 20-minute sermon, you spend 20 hours on it.
Can't
Not
do it.
anymore.
Can't do it.
And if we live in this culture where the sermon is not the main communicator, this is not the main thing that we do anymore, no matter how much you think so. That's a 20-minute slice in days and hours and many, many minutes of the week. And so 20 minutes is not half of your time, and so you don't spend half of your time preparing for it.
Yeah, 4 hours tops doing sermon preparation completely. And, when you get to the large church, then you can spend half your time doing it. But until you get there, and your sermons are not going to bring people in. And the reality is, even if you have a great sermon, it won't keep people there. What keeps people there is those things we said: integrating guests, networking, and attending and networking with people.
Discipling.
Yeah, right. All those things, those are the things you
Right.
need to spend your time on. The last thing we want to say, and we're
One
really
resource.
out of time,
Here we go.
is you can expect conflict. When you begin moving, even if it takes you 2 or 3 years to get to the 70 to 80% level of prioritizing your time with unchurched and unchurched folks, then you can expect there's going to be some conflict. And we want to recommend that before you start any of this, that you take a look at the conflict CPR, conflict prevention and reconciliation training DVDs. Work through it, get it set up so that if there is conflict, you can deal with it right then, right there, and move on. And then you can get and spend your time growing your church. Hey, we are way out of time. We appreciate you being here. We'll see you next week.
Have a great week.